Hello everyone! Welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about the most notorious serial killers of all time. These are individuals who committed some of the most heinous crimes in history, leaving a trail of terror and devastation in their wake. So, without further ado, let's get started. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's reign of terror began in the early 1970s and lasted for several years. He would often target young women who he perceived as vulnerable, often luring them with his charm and good looks. Once he had them alone, he would overpower them and take them to a secluded area where he would commit his heinous crimes. Bundy's methods of killing were particularly brutal. He would often use blunt objects such as crowbars or tire irons to bludgeon his victims to death, leaving them with severe head injuries. In some cases, he would also strangle his victims or use a sharp object to stab them. After killing his victims, Bundy would often engage in necrophilia, which involves sexual acts with a corpse. He would sometimes even take the bodies home with him and engage in sexual acts with them for several days before disposing of them. Despite being a skilled liar and manipulator, Bundy was eventually caught and convicted of his crimes. He was executed in 1989, but his legacy lives on as one of the most notorious and infamous serial killers in history. The case of Ted Bundy continues to fascinate and terrify people to this day, as many struggle to comprehend how someone so charming and seemingly normal could commit such horrific acts of violence. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were some of the most gruesome and disturbing in the history of serial killers. He targeted young men and boys, usually of African American or Asian descent, whom he would lure back to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol. Once there, he would drug them and engage in sexual acts with their unconscious bodies before ultimately killing them. Dahmer's methods of killing were particularly gruesome. He would often strangle his victims to death, but he also experimented with different methods such as injecting acid into their brains or drilling holes into their skulls. After killing them, he would often dismember their bodies and keep their body parts as trophies. He even admitted to cannibalizing some of his victims. Dahmer's killing spree finally came to an end when one of his intended victims, a 14-year-old boy, managed to escape and flag down the police. When the police arrived at Dahmer's apartment, they discovered the gruesome evidence of his crimes, including body parts stored in the refrigerator and freezer. Dahmer was eventually convicted of 17 murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was later beaten to death by another inmate in 1994. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer is particularly haunting because of the extent of his depravity and the fact that he was able to hide in plain sight for so long. It is a reminder that evil can exist in even the most mundane and ordinary of settings, and that we must remain vigilant in our efforts to identify and stop it. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was a notorious serial killer who terrorized the Chicago area in the 1970s. He was known for dressing up as a clown and entertaining children at local events, hence his nickname the Killer Clown. However, behind his friendly exterior lay a twisted and sadistic personality. Gacy would often lure his victims to his home under the pretense of offering them work or promising them money. Once there, he would overpower them and subject them to various forms of torture and sexual abuse before ultimately killing them. Gacy's preferred method of killing was strangulation, but he also used other methods such as suffocation and stabbing. The extent of Gacy's crimes only came to light when one of his intended victims managed to escape and notify the police. When the police searched Gacy's home, they discovered the remains of his victims buried under the floorboards and in the crawl space of his house. In total, 33 young men and boys were found buried on his property. Gacy was eventually convicted of his crimes and sentenced to death. He maintained his innocence until the end, but the overwhelming evidence against him left little doubt of his guilt. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994. The case of John Wayne Gacy shocked the nation and highlighted the dangers of trusting seemingly harmless individuals. It also brought attention to the issue of missing persons and the need for more rigorous investigation when people disappear. To this day, the legacy of the killer clown remains one of the most chilling and disturbing in the history of serial killers. Andrea Chicatillo. Andrei Chicatillo was a Soviet serial killer who terrorized the Rostov region of Russia for over a decade. He was known for his brutal and sadistic crimes, which involved the rape, mutilation, and murder of at least 52 women and children. Chicatillo's crimes were particularly gruesome. He would often lure his victims to isolated locations, where he would then overpower them and subject them to horrific acts of violence. He would frequently mutilate their bodies, often removing their sexual organs and even eating them. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, Chicatillo was able to evade capture for many years, due in part to his outward appearance as a quiet and unassuming family man. However, in 1990, he was finally caught when a witness saw him with one of his victims shortly before her disappearance. The police were able to track Chicatillo down through this witness, and he was eventually arrested and brought to trial. Chicatillo's trial was a sensational event that captured the attention of the world. He was found guilty of 52 counts of murder and sentenced to death. His execution in 1994 was met with relief and closure for the families of his victims. The case of Andrea Chicatillo remains one of the most horrific in the history of serial killers, and serves as a reminder of the devastating impact that such individuals can have on society. It is a testament to the importance of law enforcement and the justice system in protecting innocent people from those who seek to do them harm. Ed Gein. Ed Gein is known as one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, not because of the number of his victims, but because of the gruesome nature of his crimes. Born in 1906, Gein grew up in a household dominated by his religiously fanatic mother, who instilled in him a deep sense of guilt and shame about his sexual desires. In 1957, police investigating the disappearance of a local hardware store owner stumbled upon evidence of Gein's crimes at his isolated farmstead in Plainfield, Wisconsin. Upon entering the property, they found human bones and body parts scattered throughout the house, as well as several macabre objects made from human skin and other body parts, including a human skin suit and a belt made from nipples. Gein's crimes shocked the nation and inspired countless horror movies and novels. He was eventually found guilty of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1984 at the age of 77. Gein's case is particularly notable for the way that it highlighted the psychological impact of childhood trauma and abuse. Many experts believe that Gein's disturbing behavior was the result of a combination of factors, including his mother's religious fanaticism, his isolation on the farm, and his own repressed sexual desires. The legacy of Ed Gein continues to fascinate and terrify people to this day, and his story has become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked mental illness and childhood trauma. While his crimes were certainly horrific, they have also served as a catalyst for increased awareness and understanding of the complex factors that contribute to violent and deviant behavior. So there you have it, the 5 most notorious serial killers of all time. These individuals have left a lasting mark on history, and their crimes continue to shock and horrify us to this day. While we can never truly understand what drove these individuals to commit such heinous acts, it is important that we continue to study and learn from their crimes in order to prevent similar atrocities from occurring in the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.